get started here. So. All right, everyone's taking their seat. We're going to hear from Dr. Parker, the president of South Central College.
Thank you. Welcome to South Central College. We're really proud of our place. I just want to share our mission real quick. Our mission is to promote student success that's accessible, inclusive, that promotes regional economic development. I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing over the number of years. In 2017, we joined an elite group of community colleges around the country that focus on student success through a culture of evidence. And what we've done now through that work is last year we were selected one of 4 community colleges in the country as a leader college. And we did that, we were able to achieve that goal because our student success of students of color in our gateway courses increased by 150%.
Gotta hold the mic up for your mouth.
Okay, so our student success of students of color increased by 150%. Our Hispanic students in English courses increased by 83%. So what that suggests to us is that all of our students are gonna achieve at higher rates. And those are leading indicators that would suggest that our lagging indicators of persistence completion and entry into the workforce should increase. We're also excited that a lot of our career and technical education programs, enrollment has picked up because we said in our mission is regional economic development. We need to make sure our communities are strong, that they have the workforce of the future, and not only that our students are civically engaged in our communities that we serve at. And so we're happy to host today. I hope you enjoy your time. The bathrooms are right across the hall. We've got an amazing cafe that serves the community every day. You can come in and get a lunch cooked by students with the food grown by our students for $6.50 a day. So please come back to South Central College and visit us. Thank you, Andy, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. Hopefully everybody can hear me in the back. Good. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. My name is Andy Wilkie. I serve as the Director of Business Development and Public Affairs at Greater Mankato Growth. I am one of the moderators this evening. I'm joined by Laura Grossman of Alpha Media as co-moderator. I want to thank Laura and Alpha Media for your partnership with this forum. For those who don't know, Greater Mankato Growth is the Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development organization for the Greater Mankato region. Our membership includes more than 900 businesses, nonprofits, and public partners. We also operate Visit Mankato, the City Center Partnership, and Green Scene. Our goal tonight is simple. We want to give voters a chance to hear from candidates directly about issues that impact the business and economic vitality of our region. I want to thank you all for attending tonight, South Central College for hosting us, and lastly, our good friends at KTV and Bethany Lutheran College. This event is being recorded and will be available online at greatermankatoelections.com. Before I address some housekeeping items, I want to let you know that Greater Mankato Growth is hosting a total of 7 candidate forums this year. Next Tuesday, October 11th, House District 18B will include Luke Frederick and Dar Vosberg. And Thursday, October 13th, in this building will be the 1st Congressional District of Minnesota. You can get more information on past and on upcoming forums, along with a voter toolkit and candidate bios at greatermankatoelections.com. All right, first I'd like to set out a few expectations for our audience to help us present an engaging and civic dialogue this evening. We have more questions than we have time for, so we ask that you help us make the most of our time by holding your applause until the end of the forum, and there be no shouting or heckling, especially of the moderators. Some of you are still laughing at that after last night. This evening's format is as follows. Each candidate will be asked a question and given 2 to 3 minutes to answer the question. As moderators, we will be flexible with that time limit. This evening, we're more interested in an engaging, robust discussion in getting these candidates' thoughts on issues, so it may take longer in some instances. Any follow-up questions or discussion will be at the discretion of the moderators. These questions have been put together by me, along with Laura, and input from the Greater Mankato Growth Public Affairs Committee. They have not been shared with the candidates. And lastly, some of you have submitted questions at the entrance. Liz and Jessica, with the team, will bring those up to me later, and we will ask some as time allows. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the candidates for this evening's forum, Susan Ackland and Jeff Brand. Please join me in thanking them for being here tonight. Now we'll begin with our first question. Laura.
All right, we'll start with Susan. Susan, tell us who you are and why you're running for the Minnesota House of Representatives. Also, please share what top issues you will personally work to address at the legislature.
It's on you. Just pull it. You'll need to pull it close, maybe. There we go.
Good evening. So I'm Susan Ackland. Thank you, Greater Mankato Growth, for having us, and thank you guys for coming. It's nice to have a live audience and connect with you so that as we're answering our questions, we can tell that we're actually connecting with you. So thank you for coming, taking your time. So I'm Susan Ackland. You may notice a slight accent. I was born and raised in Oklahoma City. I actually met my husband when he came to Oklahoma to do his residency in family practice. I was the lead nurse for the University of Oklahoma, Tulsa Medical College family practice residency. He and I ended up getting married towards the end of his residency, and then once we were married, I knew that he would be looking for a place to practice, so I told him I would go anywhere but somewhere cold. And so we ended up in Minnesota. And isn't that the way it goes sometimes? But anyway, I never dreamed we'd actually be here forever. But we've been here for over 35 years now, and he has practiced. He's been in practice. I'm a nurse. So for 35 years, I've been serving my community, first as a nurse, and for the last 2 years as a state legislator. I'm trying to think, the second part of the question was, why am I running? So when I decided to run, I had not been in politics. I had never run for an office for anything, except in high school I ran for chaplain of the pep club. And I actually was elected, to my surprise, but I was the only one running. So that is my total experience with being in elections, because I was just always too afraid of losing. But one night at our home, we were having actually a group Bible study. There were about 8 of us, and subject turned to politics. And there were 2 things that stood out that night. And I was just talking, as were the other people there. I guess we were off the Bible study subject at that point. But one of them was on the East Coast. They were passing legislation that made it legal for full-term abortions. And I said, you know what, I'm so afraid that has just gone, well, that has gone too far, number one. And secondly, I was afraid it would come to Minnesota. And the other thing is, I was spouting off about the divisiveness in our country. I was tired of just seeing the Congress voting Democrat or Republican. It seemed like there was never any coming together on the issues. And I just felt like, I just said that night, you know what, somebody has to stand up and somebody has to speak up. This is not good for our country. And a friend said to me, I think you should run for office. And I knew right then I would run for office. And it was out of my character, out of my wheelhouse, because I had not been in politics. But run I did, and I had the opportunity to serve for 2 years so far in the legislature. So for my top priorities, there's, did you say 2 or 3 or how many?
3.
3,
Yes.
okay. I'm gonna do it this way. Having 2 years in the legislature has been a big eye-opener. I wish everybody could serve. I wish everyone could serve and just really see what it's like. But if if I go back for a second term, I think there's some things that we as a country need to do and we as a state. And one is, it's very discouraging to see the way that the legislature operates. We have our committees, we have our sessions, we have this, we have that. But in the end, the way we do business is not conducive to getting the work done that we need to do. And if you've noticed, we've put a lot of things off till the end of session. And then we jump them all into these big omnibus bills. And we're supposed to vote on everything all at once, May the 22nd. Well, I feel like we need to pull that back, let's walk that back, and let's do more individual bills as we go forward so that we can truly vet out the bills. So years ago, they would do a couple hundred or more bills in a session, in a yearly, that part, 1 year of the biennium. This year we only did 35. So that means we're lumping them all together into these big omnibus bills. So that, if I were the leader, I'd say, let's try to change this. Just a note, there were 4,900 plus bills introduced in session. Almost 5,000 bills. And now we lumped them all into 35. So that's one thing. Another thing I would do right away if I were the leader is I would pass legislation to end these the governor's executive orders. I would make it so that the executive order could be done, but he would only do it for a limited time. And then after that, the legislature would have to approve extensions on those orders. So that's not exactly what you were asking, but I would say the third thing is I'm on the healthcare committee. I'm a nurse. I've spent my life in healthcare. It's a topic that I'm familiar with. I'm familiar with it both on the financial side and on the patient care side. And so for me, and I'm on the health committee, there are so many issues around healthcare. And I suppose we may talk about this, but I'll just list them. So first of all, it's like the high cost of premiums and deductibles, especially for people that are on the individual market. If you're not in a group plan and you're not on Medicaid, you have a hard time paying your premiums and meeting your deductibles, and it affects the amount of care that you get because you're already paying $1,000 or $2,000 a month, and you don't want to start having to pay your deductible also. I know this firsthand from what my husband comes home and tells me. People won't get their routine care because they don't want to have to pay their deductibles. The other thing is there's a big workforce shortage in our healthcare industry. It's not unique to healthcare, but it is huge in healthcare, especially our assisted livings and our long-term cares. And then the third thing is rural Minnesota has special needs for healthcare. We're losing our hospitals, we're losing our nursing homes, we have a workforce shortage, and so healthcare is one of my main focus areas because that's one of my committees and that's something I'm really familiar with. So thank you.
Thank you.
Same question to you, Jeff?
Can you please repeat it?
Sure. Tell us who you are and why you are running for the Minnesota House of Representatives. Also, please share which top 3 issues you will personally work on to address at the legislature.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Hope everybody at home can too. I'm Jeff Brand. I'm running for the Minnesota House of Representatives. I think a lot about why I'm running, and I think about how it aligns with my values and that sort of thing. But to give you a background, my wife and I graduated from MSU in Mankato. We decided to settle in St. Peter, not only to start a business, but also to raise 2 children in this wonderful area where we've got great public schools, a lot of great amenities. We first started in North Mankato, but we ended up finding a place in St. Peter that fit our needs, and we absolutely love living here. We moved down here from Ely, Minnesota, where we met and where we were going to school at the time. So for us, it was a strategic location to our families. So my wife and I have a small business. What do? We do native plant landscaping, prairie restorations, ecological monitoring. If there's a rain garden that needs to be planted, we can do it. If there's a pollinator habitat that needs to be planted, we can do that as well. And we've been doing it for a number of years. We're working on a project right now in Mankato, a couple of projects in St. Peter, and a couple of them in North Mankato. And it's been a lot of fun these last 11 years doing these projects and seeing the end result, so to speak. Why am I running? Well, I've really enjoyed giving back to the community. I started my adventures in public service when I was actually a student senator in MSU in Mankato for a year, and I really enjoyed it. After college, I ended up working for a nonprofit, and that was a lot of fun until, of course, the housing boom became a bust, and all these nonprofits in the state of Minnesota lost their funding. And a couple of years later, after working for this environmental nonprofit where I was a community organizer, a couple of people in town said, "Hey Jeff, I think you'd be great to be a city council member in town. You should throw your hat in the ring." And I thought, are you nuts? I don't want to do that. But I brought the question home to my wife, and she didn't think I was crazy. And so I started talking to people in the city of St. Peter, and they all pretty much said, "Hey, this is a great opportunity to really be a part of the community and really do some good for the community." So I threw my hat in the ring. I won the first term, I won the second term, and naturally, by being involved with some organizations like the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, and that sort of thing, going to the Capitol, lobbying on behalf of local cities, local government, and that sort of thing, I started getting friendships at the legislature on both sides of the aisle, and in both the Senate and in the House. And so for me, at some point, I knew there was going to be kind of an organic transition to run for higher office. Well, here we are. 2 years later, I was a state representative, and I was happy, and it was the proudest moment of my life to be your state representative these last 2 years. And I'm truly looking forward to being your state representative once again. And my biggest issues that I'm running on this year are fully funding our public schools. There was an agreement at the state legislature to do that, and they walked away from it. And I think we need more people that are willing to work together to get these things done. Our healthcare system is sick. People avoid using their health insurance because it's too expensive, the premiums are too high, but also the co-pays and the deductibles for going to these visits. And so, we need to fix our healthcare system. I truly believe in a public option. I think that's something that will benefit farmers, small business owners, everybody in the state of Minnesota. And the third thing is we need to protect our natural resources, not just for now, but for future generations of Minnesotans, so they can enjoy the same things we enjoy here in Minnesota. So those are my 3 big issues, and I'm looking forward to having a great and serious conversation about everything else you bring up tonight.
Thank you, sir. We are going to stick with you, Jeff, and we're going to touch on something that's more philosophical, and I think you both talked about it. But everyone claims the current level of divisiveness and partisanship at the legislature seems to be getting worse and worse, not just along party lines, but there also appears to be an ever-increasing tension between the Twin Cities Metro and Greater Minnesota. How do you view the state's current political climate, and how would you work to build consensus in order to get work done? Jeff, to you.
It's a great question. Thank you, Andy, for asking that question. I'll take it in 2 parts. The first part is we'll talk about the divisiveness. And, when I was at the legislature, politics stopped at the water's edge, and I got to work. Not only did I work with people across the aisle in the House, in that chamber that I served in, I also spent a lot of time in the Senate working with senators to get bills passed. I'm proud of my accomplishments. I passed 13 bills until on my first 2 years in the legislature, more than any other freshman in that term. And it wasn't just simply by twiddling my thumbs and waiting for things to come to me. It was by working hard and building bridges and engaging people that were hard to engage in. But it was worth the time to build those relationships, because I knew at the end of the day, the people back home expected it. In 2018, when I knocked doors, people said, "Jeff, can't you guys just work together?" I said, "Well, look, that's actually on my yard side. Would you like one?" It says right there, working better together. It's not just a slogan, it was a mantra, and that's how we got those 13 bills passed into law. That's what I look forward to doing again in this next legislative session, give it the chance and the opportunity. It's working better together with everybody in mind in this district. Working better together got Highway 14 done for Nicollet to Newell, 50 years in the making. Working better together got a whole bunch of other developments and wonderful opportunities for this district that I'm sure we'll talk about. But at the end of the day, that's what we need more people doing up there in the legislature. We need more people that are willing to cross the aisle and work together, and less people who are partisans on the fringes who don't seem to get or understand how to work together. Now, the second part of your question had to do I believe, you'll have to remind me again, sorry.
How would you?
I'll write them down, I promise.
Work to build consensus in order to get work done.
Well, I live it through my values. When I was in the city council, we knew people's politics, but at the end of the day, we got a lot of things done 7-0. And I think that was because we wanted what was best interest for the people who lived in St. Peter. When I was at the Capitol, just the same. Those people in Moorhead that needed something, the people in Duluth that needed something, they relied on us as a legislature, not to be 201 legislators from wherever we came from, but to be 201 legislators from Minnesota, looking forward to what was in the best interest of Minnesotans. And so I live that value of working together. I think it's really an accomplishment. I think it's something that is missing at the legislature. And again, something we need more people that can not only just practice it, but also educate others on how to do it as well.
Susan, to you, how do you view our state's current political climate, and how would you work to build consensus in order to get work done?
So, how do I view our climate right now? So I mentioned that in the beginning. I'm sick of it. It's really difficult, and it is difficult in the legislature. One thing you'll notice is there's a majority and there's a minority. And I'm in the minority this year, and what I found is I felt like I was willing to work with them, work with the Democrats in my committee, etc. But I found that they didn't have to work with me because they had the votes to pass whatever they wanted to pass. So there was not an emphasis on their part or a reason on their part to have to compromise. And so it was funny when some of my first committee meetings, and I was in the Environment Committee, you know what, I'm sitting there, I'm listening, I take a vote based on what I've heard, what I've seen, what I think my conscience is telling me to vote on, and I voted. And my name's an A, so I vote, the lead usually votes first, and then I vote second. I voted different than he did, and then all the other ones voted with the lead, and I was the only Republican stuck out there by myself. Afterwards, he came into my office and he said, "Susie, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm using my head. You know what? I'm trying to do the right thing for what I have in front of me. I'm not just there to vote with my caucus." And so I actually, in both of my committees, very difficult committees to work with and work in, I actually had a reputation for being able to work together. In fact, one of the men stopped me in the hall and said, "You know what, we actually talked about you in our caucus because we feel like we can work with you." But the problem was, when I would bring an amendment that they had to hear, they wouldn't hear my bills. They didn't hear any of my bills, but they had to hear my amendments. So they'd hear my amendments, but I could not get one Democrat to vote for my amendment. They were reasonable, they were logical. So it's two-way street. Part of the problem is the majority in all the committees, and I'm just talking about what the state is like right now. In all the committees, the party and majority has a majority in the committees. So those committees, they don't worry about losing a vote to the Republicans because they've got the majority already. They're already stacked against the minority. So that makes it difficult for somebody in the minority. We can compromise all we want, but it's not going to make any difference. So it's a two-way street. So for me, when I go back, I think that I want to remember this lesson. This was not a fun time to be in committee and arguing these bills when I knew for a fact they would not support me. When I knew for a fact, even on the floor, I brought up an amendment. It was a simple physical therapy compact amendment. And only one Democrat stood up and said, "I agree with just about everything she said," but not one Democrat would vote for it. It was just common sense, basically. So there is that divisiveness, and it's strong, and we have to keep working. So I said from the beginning, I'm against this divisiveness. But for me personally, I feel like I'm a good listener, and that's part of it. And if I can start finding one more person, if I'm in the majority next time, to say, let's work together and let's get rid of these omnibus bills so we can concentrate on this one bill, and let's find something good about this bill that we can agree on, because now everybody's a winner. There's not going to be a winner and a loser. So I hope that we can do that. And maybe I'm dreaming, and if I am, our system will stay just the way it is, because right now it's very divisive. Somebody, did you mention about the metro, the divide between
Yes.
the metro and the rural? There is that divide too, and you know what? That just goes back to this problem that many of the metro legislators are Democrat. And so you see if you look at the map of how the state is blue or red, you will see Minneapolis is blue, Rochester is blue, Duluth is blue, and so you have more Democrats from those areas, and that I think is the basis why we have this division between metro and rural. And our needs are different in the rural America, in rural Minnesota. Our needs are not the same as the metro needs. Our students' needs are not the same as the student needs in the metro, and so we're always fighting for our own part of the state. We all, I have to represent Nicollet County. I have to represent my outstate constituents. Many of the Democrats are from the metro, and they have to represent theirs. So somehow that's another area we need to find some consensus and figure out what's right for everybody, so everybody succeeds, and not just one or the other.
Thank you. Laura?
We'll stick with you, Susan, as we move on to budgets and taxation. The main task of the legislature in the 2023 session will be to pass the next state budget. In 2021, the legislature passed its largest biennial budget of ever of $52 billion. Current estimates show a surplus of more than $12 billion for just this year and more than $15 billion in the next biennium. What will be your budget priorities for the next biennium?
So, all right, let's see. First, we'll go back to what just happened, and we didn't pass the tax bill. We didn't get several of our bills passed. Part of this is in the first year of the biennium, we had passed a budget. We ended up with, let me back up even beyond that. When I was running in 2020, we had a big deficit. Minnesota was in a deficit, and the reason I know that, I looked at I knew that anyway, but I looked at one of my old door hangers, and it said we can't tax Minnesota out of this deficit. So just in 2020, we were in a deficit, and now we have a $12 billion surplus. I mean, it's amazing how money can flow like that. But so from my point of view, what we need to do is, one, with that surplus, we need to handle it precision-wise. First of all, most people I hear of want their money back. We've been overtaxed, and they want their money back. And so I would recommend that we do that by tax cuts. And I just read recently that even the budget surplus, looking ahead, even if we give a tax cut to some middle class tax cut, plus our Social Security income tax cut, we will still have a surplus. That is not going to take us back down. You need, some people say we shouldn't have any surplus, that we should really handle the money that we have and not work with the surplus. But that's something that could be debated. The other thing we need to do budget-wise is we need to pass our bonding bill. I was really disappointed we didn't do a bonding bill. I was guaranteed that my Caswell Park bill was in there. And of course, nobody can guarantee anything till the bill passes. But it's a problem, because for all these, whether it's Armstrong Hall or whether it's the wastewater or the water treatment center, Caswell Park, the inflation rate is causing the cost of those projects to go up so much that the amount we would have bonded for last year isn't going to be enough to cover. So we're going to have to bond for more or cut projects. So we need to, when we go back, we need to we need to get past the tax bill, and it should include tax cuts, permanent tax cuts, including an income tax elimination on Social Security income.
Jeff, what will be your budget priorities for the next biennium?
Well, as I said in my introduction, one of my top priorities is fully funding education, public education. And when I say fully fund public education, I just don't mean giving all of these school districts the resources they need in order to keep the lights on, to keep their teachers paid. What I'm talking also about is making sure that we have an appropriate amount of school counselors and social workers. Did you know that Minnesota is 49th in the nation when it comes to the amount of social workers per student? That's terrible. And we are balancing the budget on the backs of our students who are in crisis. When I was your representative, the folks from Mankato District 77 came to my office, and 3 of the 5 counselors were in tears. Because
Yeah,
they...
talking to the microphone, please.
Okay, can you hear me better?
Now I do.
All right, great.
Do you want to move up front, sir? You can maybe hear a little better.
As I was saying, the counselors were in tears because they had a waiting list of students for the next day. I don't know about you, but when a kid is in crisis, they're in crisis now. They're not in crisis tomorrow or the next day or the next day. So our budget is a moral document. We're not meeting the needs of our students today. Our cross-subsidy that we use to pay for student, special ed students isn't paid by the state of Minnesota appropriately. And so as a result, school districts have to ask for a levy increase in order to pay for that missing part of the budget, which our state full well has the capabilities of paying for. My friend, Dan Wolgamott up in St. Cloud actually had the bill to fully fund the cross-subsidy. Unfortunately, that was also part of the agreement and was walked away from the deal. Unfortunately, I'm really hopeful that we can cover that as well. Besides fully funding our education, making sure that our public students have the resources they need to both reduce the achievement gap, but also to give them the world-class education that they deserve, I think that we ought to spend some money to tackle some of the issues of the day. When I was at the legislature, we reduced the taxes for people making between $50,000 and $100,000 a year. I was on the tax committee. That was one of the things that we were working on in a bipartisan fashion. I'm glad we were able to get that to the end of the table. I was also able to work on increasing the working family tax credit. That was one of my accomplishments, from 2 dependents to 3 dependents. But at the end of the day, we've got a lot of families that are struggling right now. And they've been struggling for a very long time. Imagine if you're a family member that's working for the county as a PCA. Those wages are terrible. We are balancing the budget on the backs of PCAs. I had a great conversation not too long ago about housing. And because the legislature walked away from that deal, folks like Partners for Housing had to actually unwind the funding that they had for emergency housing here in Mankato, in the greater Mankato area. These are people who are in crisis that need a home, at least temporarily, until they can get things figured out on their feet. These are people who are dealing with domestic abuse. These are people who are dealing with mental illness. These are people that are dealing with substance abuse. Those people deserve dignity as well. And so when we look at what we're going to do with our budget, what we're looking to do with our bonding bill, or our tax bill, or our various committee bills, we have to lead with our values. And that's really, really important to me. And that's something I've done in the legislature, and that's something that I will be working very hard on as well in the future.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, we're moving right along here. So we've got a quick question about bonding. So Jeff, we'll stick with you on this. This past session, the legislature failed to pass a bonding bill to fund important capital projects throughout the state, including several critical local projects seeking funding. Do you support passing a bonding bill early in the 2023 session to fund these projects? Jeff, to you.
We're in a very awkward position going back to the legislature in January of 2023 because it's a budget year. It's not a bonding year. We've got, $52 billion was talked about here just a little while ago. When I was there, it was $48 billion that we passed. Took a little extra time, about a week of extra time to finish it, but we were able to do that. And so if we are going to have a new legislature with, I believe, close to 50% brand new legislators, it's going to be incredibly difficult to have all those projects ready to go. We're going to have new people who don't know what a bonding bill even looks like involved in that process. That's going to take some time. We're going to have new people who have never been elected to government before, trying to figure out what these bonding projects in their local communities are going to mean for them. So I think it's really important that we do have a discussion about what a bonding bill looks like. But honestly, even Julie Rosen, she's the finance chair in the Senate, she said this was the bonding year, and this was the golden opportunity to pass the bonding bill. But unfortunately, this legislature actually hamstrings the next legislature's abilities to do everything at once. I'm fully committed to doing a bonding bill. I think that that's really important. When I was in the legislature, that bonding bill meant $2 million for Caswell Park. That bonding meant $1.7 million worth of upgrades at the Regional Treatment Center in St. Peter. That bonding bill means a lot to a lot of people across this district, and it is really important. Now, the costs are going to be extra because of inflation, there's no doubt. But look what the costs are going to be passed on to each of the people who live in, citizens in Mankato, because that water treatment plant wasn't passed. It's really unfortunate. And I think the legislature, if I'm not mistaken, still has about 2 months to come back. Maybe they can get it done. I don't know if we're going to do that with an election coming up. But as you kind of heard, if you paid attention during this legislative session, the bonding bill was one of those last carrots. We had to have the finance bills done first. And then it was going to be the tax bill. And over in the Senate, they were actually playing games where they were tabling all the bills once they passed them. They didn't send them over to the House for final bill or final passage. We need to have people that are willing to work, not people who are willing to showboat or play political games and that sort of thing. That's really disappointing also.
Thank you. Susan? Do you support passing a bonding bill early in the 2023 session to fund these important local bonding projects?
So, and I talked about this a little bit in the previous question, so yes, I am for that. I have asked I've asked leadership, can we do this? Because you do go in saying, okay, the first year's a budget year and the second year's a bonding year. Well, is that law, or is that just the way we've been doing it? So I've been told, yes, we can pass a bonding bill. And to Jeff's point, is it something that we can do fairly quickly? Because most of these projects are in there. Can we hear that again quickly? We've heard about them, we've talked about them for over a year now. Can we go ahead and do that? Because I agree, education's a priority, healthcare's a priority, everything's a priority, but those bills are gonna have to go through committee, and they're going to take some time to vet them out before they can come to the session. So that's not something we're gonna pass in the first 2 weeks. Those aren't gonna come out quickly. So there's a lot of bills that go through that. I know the Health and Human Service final omnibus bill included 254 individual bills. So, and that was Health and Human Services. I get that, but even in health, all the bills we heard didn't get put into the bill. So I agree. It would be nice if we could come back right away ready to pass some of this legislation, and I think if we do it step by step rather than waiting till the end and putting it all in a big omnibus bill, we'll make some progress, and it will happen quicker than it does now. But I think bonding can be done. I think the projects are in there. We know what they are. We may have to the rates. We may have to reevaluate how much each project gets because the cost is going to be higher.
Thank you.
Our next topic is economic development, and Susan will stick with you for this two-part question. In your view, what is the role of the legislature in supporting business vitality and economic development? What specific steps or programs would you support to grow businesses and jobs in Minnesota?
Okay, this is a good question, thank you. So what is the legislature's role in supporting business vitality? So our role our role is to, I think through legislation, make Minnesota a place that businesses want to come to. And then once they're established, make it a place where it's worth their time to grow, expand, and stay here. We do have businesses leaving, and I don't know statistics on this, and I didn't bring them with me, but through the legislature, one thing that we talk about a lot is the high tax rate for businesses in Minnesota, so I think we need to address that issue. The other thing that we do, and I hear this from businesses across the board, too many rules, too many mandates, and these mandates either prevent their growth or they prevent employing the number of people that they would like to because of some of the rules that they're under. And so the legislature needs to be careful in how we actually make these laws that affect our businesses. We need to attract businesses, keep them going and growing, but there's a balance here because we have employees on the other side. So we want to make sure our employees are gainfully employed and happily employed and get the benefits that they need. So we need some balance there, and I think right now one side wants more of this and one side wants less of that, and so pretty soon we're out of balance, but we need to find balance in that. So we want our business to stay. Here in southern Minnesota, I just had a conversation today with the leader of Green Scene, and you know, I represent this district. So I'm always looking at what is right for this district. And so as I go back, I'm excited to go back because agriculture is such a huge part of our district. It's just not the people who do the farming and plant the crops and harvest the crops and take them to the processors, but we have several businesses, many businesses. In fact, we have the highest concentration of those ag businesses in Mankato in this area, anywhere in the nation. So, and he said probably anywhere in the world. So ag business is huge in this area, and I'm looking forward to going back and making sure that that business continues to thrive, because that's what this district is made up of. Thank you.
Jeff, to you, what is the role of the legislature in supporting business vitality and economic development? And also, what specific steps or programs would you support to grow business and jobs in Minnesota?
Thank you. Business vitality is actually within the mission of Greater Mankato Growth, and I think that's really important because Greater Mankato Growth has a wonderful track record of doing what they do, not just here locally, but also across the state, especially in St. Paul. They've been a great partner to me at the legislature. You know, I'm not always right, they're not always right, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of great partnership and a lot of great consensus, and I really appreciate that. When I was on the city council, I had the benefit of going to a lot of Rural Economic Development Association meetings, REDA meetings, and we got to hear from Region 9 talking about the great things that we're doing here in terms of investment, innovation, all the wonderful things that we're doing to attract labor, to attract businesses, and so it's really wonderful. I'm going to push back a little bit because I don't think that businesses are leaving the state of Minnesota. And I've got two examples of where that's the case. Winnebago has been in Forest City since 1958, until 2 years ago when they moved to St. Paul. Why is that? Because they wanted to become the premier outdoor recreation company in this country. And they knew that they could do it better off with a better workforce here in Minnesota. Another example is SunOpta. They moved here from another state. Why? Because we have a better quality of life here. Not only that, because of all these people in the audience and all the people at home. We're smarter, and there's no doubt the statistics show that. We have better SAT scores. We are more educated in the state. People want to move here because they know that they'll get a better workforce. They know the hardworking Midwesterners. And it's not just a cliche. We are very hardworking here in Minnesota. And so I'm going to push back a little bit about that. Well, what I will say is that in Minnesota, it's hard to have a small business. There's no doubt about that. I don't know how many of you are small business owners, but I am, and it's really difficult to pay health insurance every month. It's really difficult. And so, a lot of people are stuck at jobs where they have health insurance when they could be entrepreneurs. They could create the next widget that puts Minnesota on the map, just like 3M did almost 100 years ago. But they have to work at their current job for their insurance to take care of their dependents and their spouse and everybody else. And so as a result, I think the way we have health insurance and we're tying that to our occupation actually stifles innovation. It actually stifles the entrepreneurial spirit of the people who settled in this state 150 years ago. And so I think that we really ought to work on a public option, something where our small business owners and our farmers can save lots of money. Could you imagine if you were a farmer and you could save $600 a year, or rather a month, on your health insurance and still be able to go to the same care provider that you have? They'd sign up for it. In fact, when I talk to farmers about that, their ears perk up. Clark Johnson and Kathy Sharon were both representatives and senators here in this district, and they fought for that over 6 years ago. Yet we're no closer to that end goal of providing a public option here in Minnesota. And I think it's an opportunity where we could actually provide a benefit for small business owners and everybody else in the state to decide for themselves if they want to be entrepreneurs or not. Economic vitality to me means a lot of things. But at the end of the day, what we can't do is we can't continue to have growth at the cost of sustainability. We have to have those natural resources in Minnesota, which is clean air, clean water, a beautiful place to go on vacation, a beautiful place to call our home, just so we can make that much more profit. And that is something we also have to address at the legislature. And that is something that my colleagues in the legislature have been working on, and I look forward to being part of that conversation as well. So those are the things I think about when I think about economic vitality. I hope we answered your question.
Thank you, Jeff. We're going to switch gears and talk about public safety. Public safety continues to be a key issue. In recent years, public trust in law enforcement has become a more significant issue than ever before. What can you do from the legislature to help keep our community safe and increase public trust in law enforcement? Jeff, do you?
First, I'd like to describe for you that when I was a city council member in St. Peter, I was in charge of making sure that we had those budgets in place to make sure that those police officers had the resources that they needed. And it was increasingly more difficult to do that as the cost of a police car would go up, but what the state gave us in local government aid continued to go down. That meant all those property taxes owners, those property owners in St. Peter, and I'm sure Mankato, North Mankato, all across the state, also had to pay a little bit more in taxes in order to make sure that those squad cars were up to date, to make sure that they had the most safety equipment. Now we're having conversations about body cameras and storage, and that's an opportunity for the city to do better, I think, as well. I support body cams. And when I was in the legislature, I helped pass a bipartisan bill when it came to police reform and accountability. Both Democrats and Republicans supporting that bill, passing it into law. The governor signed it into law. Is that bill something that is like the thing we can rest our laurels on and say, we've done it? No. But in this last legislative discussions, when we had that $12 billion as we were talking about, I think at the time it was closer to $10 billion, but I think it continues to grow. There was money for Greater Minnesota to tackle fentanyl, for local police departments to actually address fentanyl in our cities. But everybody walked away from that deal. That would have meant fentanyl would be less trafficked because more people would have been caught, because they would have been allowed to have more resources to do more investigations. Fact is that we've got fentanyl in all of our communities right now, and it's deadly. I just talked to a woman who lost her grandson to fentanyl. One time he tried it, he didn't make it out. In this country, we have 220 people who die every day to fentanyl. What are we doing about it? Are we going to make deals and walk away from them, or are we going to actually have grown-ups going to St. Paul to do the work that we need to do to get things accomplished? just like that.
Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, not quite done.
All right.
You know, in this last election, and I have to address it because I think it really has impacted me quite greatly. You know, all the flyers and all the things saying that I was anti-police and that sort of thing. You know, when I think about my kids, and I think about my business, and I think about my home, and I think about my wife, I also think about those police officers who go to work every day in St. Peter, or Mankato, or North Mankato when I was state representative. And they have families too. And I thought, how horrible would it be if one of those officers didn't come home? And I think it's pretty emotional for me because at the end of the day, we have a lot of police officers that do a lot of great things in our communities, whether it be prevention programs, whether it be education programs, whether it be locking up the people that rightly deserve to be locked up. And at the end of the day, when people say that, you know, I in particular was part of this defund the police movement, no. I will tell you the cold, stone-hearted truth. No. I never once said defund the police. And I actually kind of am offended that people said that about me. But now I get the chance to clear the air on that. And so, you know, at the end of the day, I think that in our justice system, we've got mayors, city council members, county commissioners, we've got police officers, police chiefs. All those people are part of the great wheel of criminal justice. And we have to make sure that they're all resourced appropriately so they can do their jobs appropriately. Not just to protect us, but also to do their jobs safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Susan, to you, what can you do from the legislature to help keep our community safe and increase public trust in law enforcement?
So, Jeff has brought up several points, and you know, if we sit here and talk, we're all going to agree. We want to fully fund the police. We want to restore respect for our police. None of us like the situation that we're in when Minneapolis is down over 200. Somebody said recently more like 300. I'm not sure of the number. St. Peter seems to be able to hire. We're doing okay in St. Peter. But across the state, we are down a significant number of officers. And part of that problem, and you hear about the different reasons for it, but a lot of it is burnout, part of it is PTSD. There's many reasons for it, and so the legislature has actually tried to make going into law enforcement more, don't want to say the word attractive, but you know, like by giving, by increasing some of their benefits, so that, you know, just financially it's more affordable for them. But I think the problem goes way deeper than that. It all started, didn't start, but the big issue came back when we had the riots in Minneapolis. I mean, that was really that was kind of a turning point for the state as far as our police officers were concerned. I'm going to say something then, and I actually hadn't planned to say this tonight, but when I was running in 2020, I had a call from Brian Peters. And I don't know if you know Brian Peters, but he is the head of the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. I didn't even know who he was when I picked up the phone. But he said, "This is Brian Peters, I'm from the MPPOA." And he says, "I want you to know that I am pulling Jeff Brand's endorsement from the MPPOA and I'm giving it to you." I didn't recognize the significance of that at the time. And I didn't even know why at the time. I didn't even know enough to ask why. But I do know that as time has gone by and we've seen legislation and votes that were taken, that's probably one of the reasons. And also, this year, the MPPOA has endorsed me again, and it hasn't endorsed Jeff. So we can talk about supporting police, but unless our name is on that legislation and we're voting it, the police chief, Brian Peters, he only has my vote to know if I support police or not. And my vote has stood the test of, yes, I am in full support of the police. So what do we do to keep our keep our communities safe, number one, we fully fund the police. We need more police, we need security officers, we need all levels. But we have to increase the respect. You know, we have a problem with gun violence and things like that. Well, we have lost so much respect for our people in authority that our society has gotten out of balance here. We need to restore that respect. But the other thing we need to do is we need to hold these criminals accountable. People are committing the same crime over and over. They get thrown in jail, they get out the same day. They go back the next day and commit the same crime. And there's very little penalty for them. They don't even have to pay a fine sometimes to get out of jail. And so the county attorneys, they're not prosecuting as strictly as they used to. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all fix for this problem, but I think we need to give more credence to what has happened to the victims and less credence to and hold criminals accountable according to the law, not beyond the law, but according to the law. Hold them accountable. I appreciate that Jeff brought up the fentanyl problem because it's huge. It's huge. We tried to pass a bill this year on the fentanyl issue. What we wanted to do, so you have drugs on the street, and you have morphine, and let's say that's a lower level drug, believe it or not. Then you've got heroin, and then you've got fentanyl. Fentanyl's way worse than heroin, but when we look at the law for for fentanyl, the level of possession is so much lower for fentanyl than it is for heroin to even be charged. Talking about the sale of fentanyl, the penalty for the sale of fentanyl is lower than the penalty for heroin or morphine. And morphine's almost, it doesn't hold the same weight that heroin and fentanyl do. And so we need to change the laws on that. I talked to the same grandmother whose grandson died. It's the worst thing a parent can ever even imagine. And we've got, I just read recently, we've got enough fentanyl on the streets right now to kill, I think they said every person in Minnesota, and maybe more. I mean, it's rampant. In fact, Minnesota is not just a destination for fentanyl. Minnesota now is a distribution center for fentanyl. So we need to get this fentanyl off the street before it kills more of our children.
Thank you. We are running a little bit behind, so I may ask you guys to speed up a little bit, please. I know we've got lots to say. So Laura, time is flying by, so Laura's got our next question.
Next question is on transportation. Minnesota's transportation infrastructure faces funding challenges at all levels, including a significant shortfall in state highway funding over the next 20 years. This past session, efforts are made to dedicate 100% of the auto parts sales tax collections to transportation, effectively doubling the allocation from roughly $150 million to $300 million annually. Susan, this goes to you. Do you support dedicating 100% of auto parts sales tax to transportation, or what other funding solutions do you support?
So thank you for the question. I need to see the numbers on that, how it would affect the rest of the budget. Because if we dedicate that part, that means somewhere else in the budget it's going to be less. So there again is that balancing act that we need to do. And I think we can do it. I actually think it is a good idea to use the sales tax from auto parts to fund transportation. And if it gets us up to where we need to be, that we can keep our roads and bridges in the shape that they need to be in, that's the thing we need to do. There has been in the past a suggestion that we increase our gas tax, and that this gas tax automatically increases each year. I would not be in favor of that at this point, and I know that my cohort here, he was in favor of that at some point, and I'd like to hear if he actually still thinks that's a viable option or not.
Jeff, to you, do you support dedicating 100% of auto parts sales tax to transportation, Or what other funding solutions do you support?
Yeah, if we dedicated 100% of auto parts taxes to a transportation situation, we wouldn't get much accomplished in our transportation across the state of Minnesota. Our problems are many in not just in the Twin Cities, but also in greater Minnesota. And if that's the solution to the problem, that's a pretty short-sighted way of doing it. It wasn't too long ago that we had a bridge collapse in Minnesota. Killed people. It was a devastating thing that happened. That was the last time that gas taxes were increased in Minnesota. And that was in response to some people actually dying on I-35. And so, you know, we can put money in our gas, or we can pay money for our gas right now, but also, I have to point out that in these smaller cities under 10,000, they're not getting 1 penny of gas taxes. They're not getting any money from the state right now. And so I actually sponsored a bill that would have actually sent $30 million to small cities. Places like Nicollet, places like Cortland, places like Lafayette. We have to decide, do we have curb and gutter or do we not, because we can't afford it? Do we patch those potholes that many more times, or is it time to rebuild? And when it's time to rebuild those roads, the taxpayers that live there have to pay 100% of it. That's quite expensive. And so, you know, our transportation in greater Minnesota in particular is really kind of a challenge. We talk about this greater metro, greater Minnesota urban divide. Well, I'll tell you that when I was trying to fund Highway 14, I had a legislator say, I want that money for my district. And we need to have legislators that are willing to educate those folks and say, look, what's good for you is also good for me. You have constituents that come down to my district. Do you want them to come back safely or not? And also, you know, we're talking about an infrastructure system that was built for the 20th century. Last time I checked, we were 22 years into the 21st century. And we've got new challenges. Bigger semi-trucks. We've got farming equipment that's heavier than it's ever been before. We must build our road system in greater Minnesota so our tractors and our farmers and all those wonderful things that they're collecting right now from the fields get to market safely and efficiently. And they can't do that if the road's out. They can't do it if people are flying by at 65 miles per hour. You know, part of our transportation funding also is in funding our state patrol. Many people forget that. Well, that's part of public safety, isn't it? And also, you know, when we talk about our transportation system itself, yeah, I did support a gas tax. At the time we were talking about a gas tax, we were hoping in negotiations we would get there. It didn't happen. I know that they had conversations in the last biennium, and it didn't get there. So we're looking at 2 bienniums down the road, we're kicking that can. Transportation funding still isn't meeting the need. Oh, by the way, we also have to address the transit issue. Because if we can get people off of those roads and onto buses, I can haul my camper through the Twin Cities a lot easier, or my boat to the lake, greater Minnesota folks. So there is a benefit as well. And so I would look for an adequate solution to our funding, whether it be through the surplus or by some other means. But I'm going to tell you, I'm only one person. There's 200 other people that make decisions at the legislature. It's about working in the best judgment together, collaboratively, to get something like that funded, because it is a big concern of mine.
Thank you, Jeff. We are going to talk about talent and workforce. Employers are struggling more than ever to hire employees to fill some of the most essential positions. From your perspective, what are the key strategies for ensuring that Minnesota has an abundant and qualified workforce now and into the future? What other workforce issues do you see need to be addressed or given our current economy? Jeff, yeah.
Well, we have to make sure that we fully fund our education systems so that way those students can become hard workers. We have to make sure that we are doing whatever we can to allow our cities and our communities to have their housing needs met so we can attract that workforce here. We have lost professionals in St. Peter and Mankato and North Mankato. And I tell you, I've heard the stories. Yeah, we were gonna move there, but we couldn't find a house. That's a big problem. There are people in St. Peter that drive 50 miles round trip to Nicollet and back, twice a day, to drop off their kids in childcare. That's a crisis I tried to address when I was in the legislature. Our childcare needs in Minnesota, in this particular part of the world, we're down 1,000 slots for our childcare. How do we address that? We need to address that. We need to make sure that those parents can go back to work. We're talking about how we've got historically low unemployment rates. We gotta get those parents back to work. And if we allow them to go back to work, they don't have to take a 5 to 10 year hiatus from their career path just because they wanted to raise their family and grow a family. We're talking about amenities. We can attract that talent from Iowa and South Dakota, I guess Wisconsin too. But at the end of the day, we have to have those amenities so we can do that. We can't just sell them a false promise. Yeah, come to the promised land, we've got everything you want. We actually have to invest. And that's value. And that's really something we need to talk about when we talk about our budget. That's a value that we want to make sure that we have those amendments for those people to come. They're in southwestern Minnesota, they're losing people. In fact, there was discussion about losing an entire Senate district because the population is leaving. We have to make sure that those young children that grow up in those smaller towns feel like they can be part of that community in the future. Not to leave for the Twin Cities, not to leave for other places like Sioux Falls or Des Moines or wherever the case is. We want to keep them here in Minnesota. We have a lot of colleges. We have about 15,000 students right now that are taking classes. I want them all to move here when they're done, not go back home wherever they came from. All those Gustavus students, all those MSU students, all those South Central students should feel like they can actually be a part of our community, not just now, but in the future. Why? Because I see the investment. My wife and I did that. And I see that there are a lot of young folks that hopefully will also do the same thing. And they'll start businesses in these little towns and become entrepreneurs and that sort of thing. And hopefully there's jobs for them as well. But, we can't do that if we're cutting budgets. We can't do that if we're not wisely making value-based investments for the benefit of our communities, not just now, but into the future.
Thank you, Joe. Susan, to you, talented workforce. What are the key strategies for ensuring that Minnesota has an abundant and qualified workforce now and into the future? What other workforce issues do you see need to be addressed given our current economy?
So it is true. Our workforce, no matter where I go, it seems like there's a workforce issue. Whether I'm talking to clinics, healthcare systems, they need nurses, they need x-ray techs, they need the gamut of healthcare workers. If you're talking education, our charter school in Nicollet County closed in Lafayette because it didn't have enough teachers. So education is manufacturing. I talked to Lindsay Windows just a week or two ago. He said he could use probably 10 more workers. And I talked to one of our farmers just a week ago who owns a dairy. He needs more workers. So everywhere I go, workforce is a key issue. And this is literally, if we want to work on a problem right away, we need to pull all these groups together and let's talk about what we're going to do. Because the problem, we've got so many things going on here. Number one, okay, so the nursing homes, they increase the wages. So now say their medical assistant is up to $15. Well, now this same person can go to McDonald's for $16 or $17. And so we have this problem that some of these, I'll call them starter jobs, and maybe they're not starter, but they can be a starter job. The pay is not keeping up in these areas that we need, like education or healthcare, with what our retailers are paying. And so, but then it falls back to a problem that we have with the state legislature is how much are we going to fund, how much are we going to pay the nursing home or how much are we going to support the nursing home so that they can actually pay these wages to keep their workers there. The work in the healthcare system is difficult, and it's nights, it's weekends, it's holidays, it's not easy, and so that pay needs to be commensurate with what the job is. There's so much to this, and I have talked to the president of South Central myself about how do we entice children, students to come, and how do we, once they're trained, how do we keep them here? And how do we actually fill more of these make sure our educational opportunities are filled, that students know about them in high school so they can come and they're prepared to work after a 2-year training. One thing we did in the legislature, and I agree, these schools need to be fully funded. When we did the budget the first year, they were fully funded and they had a percentage increase. So the next year we had some extra money, so people were asking for some supplements. It didn't happen, but they did have a budget to work on for the first 2 years. But nonetheless, what we need to do is make education more affordable. One thing we didn't do this year, we didn't lower the cost of tuition. Students, everybody knows there's a huge issue with students coming out with these gigantic loans. So one thing we did at South Central was we tried to work on a program where at least the books and there would be no cost for books or syllabus or things like that they would all be online. So at least the student wouldn't have that charge. I mean, it may seem like a small thing, but everything helps when a student is not financially supported by parents or someone else, and so they have to work part-time, and that money can better go to their housing or to their food. The schools also have the food programs. We're trying to help the students so they have more of, that they don't go hungry. I know some kids live on ramen their whole time they're in school. But we want children, I say children because you know what, they're all children to me. But we want the kids to be healthy. We want them to be fed a decent meal so they can perform better. He mentioned workforce, he mentioned housing. Housing has been a big problem. And I know the Housing Committee has worked on that tirelessly, and they're so passionate about it to try to get affordable housing. So, and childcare also. But those problems, housing, childcare, those we don't want to see everything in silos, but we have to address those. But one thing I keep coming back to, and I don't have a great answer on this, it's not just about pay, just about housing. It's about we don't have enough people to fill these jobs. And I was just today talking to the Green Seam executive, and said, what's your take on that? Because we just need some people here working. And so I'm just going to throw this out. We have immigration, we have legal immigration that we could bring people in, train them to fill this gap that we have, because right now we have the baby boomers up here that are all going to need health care and need long-term care, etc. But then we have a dip where we had zero population growth, and it's going to take some time till we get back up. I understand we're going back up, but right now we have a critical need. And so I'm thinking, and the farmer that I talked to that needed 10 employees, he said, boy, if it was easier for me to figure out how to get these immigrants up here legally, I would do it. But he says, I don't know how to do it, and I think it's a big process. So maybe I don't know. And so I haven't looked into it yet, but I mentioned it to Sam today, I'll just say his name. I mentioned it to Sam, and he's going to call that man and say, you know what, can we work on this? Because it's a problem. We need workers.
Thank you. We're going to try and get through 3 more questions. We got a little bit of time here, so we're going to skip a few, but Laura is going to continue to talk about agriculture and Green Seam.
Susan, we'll start with you. Recognizing that in many rural communities, agriculture represents the largest economic sector and source of employment, Greater Mankato Growth, Inc. includes Green Seam, an initiative with a mission to position our region as the go-to location for talent, business, innovation, and education related to agriculture. How will you work to promote our state's ag economy to ensure the economic vitality of Greater Minnesota?
Thank you. So I've mentioned Green Seam several times. And I'll just say our district and Mankato area, we have a huge, we have, like I mentioned before, we have our ag, not just the farming, but the processing, the distribution, et cetera, of this, of the agricultural products that we produce is tremendous. We have a super opportunity here in this area. And so as I've been a legislator, it's been one of my greatest rewards is to go to the rural community and talk to the farmers and see where they're at, how they're doing, what they're struggling with, what their fears are, what their hopes are. There is so much to this, to the ag community that what we need to do, I think Green Seam is a great organization. And also the schools like South Central. I mean, it's a multi-level problem. We need families to be able to pass their farms on to the next generation without these, some of them are fearing that they're not going to be able to because of the estate tax. So that's a problem, we need to work on that. Some of the farmers have expressed a concern to me with the green energy coming, that their livelihoods, which is producing corn that's turned into biofuel, some of the farmers, 50% of their corn is turned into biofuel. And so if we don't support our agricultural community, our greatest resource right here in District 18A will be greatly impacted. So I, as a legislator, I'm not a farmer, but I have experts in the farming field that I can talk to that can direct me, because we need to make sure that our farming community is reliable, sustainable, and will continue on into the future, because that is one of our greatest resources right here in Nicollet County.
All right, thank you. Jeff, how will you work to promote our state's ag economy to ensure the economic vitality of greater Minnesota?
I grew up on a dairy. And I remember my family had that awkward conversation about selling and closing down the business. And I remember the tears and the feelings and all of the things from 1996 when my family decided that was in their best interest at the time. There's no doubt that in our farming economy is one of challenges, but also of opportunities. When I was at the legislature, I was the vice chair of the Ag Committee. And we put together a damn good bill that did a lot of great things. It addressed things like farm safety. It actually put $50,000 into Green Seam to make that Green Seam program have the ability to leverage funding with other entities across southern Minnesota. We responded to farmer mental health by increasing the amount of people who go from farm to farm to take care of those crisis moments. I was also the chief author of the bill, the Forever Green Bill, that introduces 16 new crops to Minnesota farmers through the University of Minnesota developing that. Just imagine if we can get a new crop that farmers are interested in growing. And if we had 1 million acres of that crop, we could create a new different type of biofuel. And that biofuel would be in each of the engines, in each of the gas tanks, of each of the Delta planes that fly out of Minneapolis and St. Paul Airport every day. That's coming because at the University of Minnesota, they're working on a crop called camelina. And the folks at Chevron, the folks at Delta said, give me 1 million acres of that, and that's what we'll be flying into the future. That's going to impact our air quality for the better. How you grow camelina is going to impact farmers financially for the better. These are things that are being developed now that have the possibility of providing farmers better income. Your average farmer makes $20,000 a year. Why would you want to be a farmer to make $20,000? You know, that's a challenge. It's a lifestyle for sure. There are other opportunities that are available. Other folks, you know, when you're a farmer, you're also a welder, you're also a this and a that, an electrician. And maybe it's just a lot better to be a welder or an electrician instead of a farmer. We need those farmers. We need those farmers badly because our average farmer is getting ready for retirement. Who's gonna take over that land when they're done with it? Their children don't wanna do it, they maybe have moved on to other pursuits. We need to make sure that we've got another crop of farmers, get it, crop, kind of a pun, to take over those farms. And we need people of different cultures who are coming here in droves. They come from places that are agricultural. We could have more Somali farmers on our landscape. We could have more Hmong farmers or Hispanic farmers on our landscape. And they are coming. And also more women that are farmers as well. We need to be ready at the legislature to tackle those issues head on and give the pathways so those farmers can be participating in our workforce and feeding us and feeding our nation into the future. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of bill that I passed when I was at the legislature. It was bipartisan and it was successful.
Thank you, Jeff. We are running down on time here, so I want to do at least one question from our attendees, and then we're going to get to our final question for you. So this was a question submitted. I think it ties well with the workforce and talent discussion we had earlier. So Jeff, to you, what are you doing for affordable housing? Or what do you plan to do for affordable housing?
That's a good question. So when I was a city council member, what we did was we worked in partnership with the Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership to put together new units of housing that were affordable in St. Peter. As a state legislator, what I will do is I will commit to increasing that budget. The housing budget in the state of Minnesota legislature is the second lowest. It's 10 million or less. How are we going to continue to make sure that all these communities that have these issues aren't getting the money that they need? Southwest Minnesota Housing Partnership, they work with the federal government, they work with our state government. They take the money and they use it in our communities and reinvest in housing. Places like Marshall, places like Fairmont, places like St. Peter, places like Mankato too, because housing is really important. It's making sure that we identify those partners, we work well with those partners, and we make sure that they have the resources in order to do things that they can do to make all of our communities successful. That's what I'll do.
Thank you, Jeff. Susan, affordable housing.
So affordable housing, one thing that I can just say that always came up, every time they wanted to add, and when we're talking in committee, it might be in the, even in the environment committee, they would want to put these rules and regulations on building. And these building costs would always, it sounds reasonable, it sounds nice, but the building, it adds to the building cost. Or in the DNR, we would add a fee to something, and when a house is sold, they'd add this fee onto the seller, onto the buyer. And the people in housing would say, but this is just another fee, it's just another cost. It might seem like a small thing, but sometimes when somebody is, it might be the difference between $1,000 whether or not they can afford a house. And so we would always be careful in the legislature this year when we talked to our housing partners about, how will this affect housing? Because some of it had to do with, better this or better that. How will it affect the price of housing? So we need to always be cognizant of that. We want to protect our environment. We want the houses to be more energy efficient. We want those, but we also have to realize that we're increasing the cost of the houses to some degree. The other thing, one of the problems with housing and the high cost of housing right now is just because of our supply chain and the high cost of materials and the high cost of labor and et cetera, et cetera. And so, you know what, when our economy comes back to where it belongs, and the high price of lumber is what do you say, sort of equalizes, and we can get housing back to a reasonable cost, because right now, even when you look around at what the houses are selling for, it's amazing. I sit and wonder, how can anyone afford these houses? And these are, I think they said, the starter homes are like $200,000. That's a lot of money for a first-time home buyer. So did I answer the question? I'm off track.
Yeah.
Okay.
Laura.
All right, well, as we close, we want to give each of you a chance to make your case to voters by answering one simple question. And Susan, we'll start with you. Why should voters vote for you?
Thank you. So, when I decided to run, part of when you decide to run for an elected office, you need to get the buy-in from your family. So I had my husband at the time, we had this discussion, and he was hesitant to put a stamp of approval on, because he said to me, "But Susie, you're only one person. What difference can you make?" And he said that several times to me, and I would always come back with this answer: but if I don't try, I won't make a difference. And that's what kept me going. I knew that on election day, whether I won or whether I lost, not having tried would have been worse than either winning or losing. Not having tried, I would have said to myself that day, why didn't I try? Because I see myself, as I've mentioned before, as that person. Our society is so tired of the fighting and the bickering and the negative campaign ads and things. That's just why people are fed up with the government and with us as legislators, because we need to show more respect for each other. So I come from a family of respectful people, strong people, but respectful, and I want to take that same thing to the legislature. Yes, it's hard. I don't know everything. I know a lot about healthcare and some of the other things that I delve into, but I depend on experts like you and in your fields of expertise to help me to know what is the right thing to do in this. I call them the farmers, I call them the manufacturers, I call them the hunters, to find out help me understand this and how this is going to impact you long term. So my learning has been great, but what I bring to the legislature, and I think this is really important if we ever hope to turn our society back to this congenial society that we used to know, where we could talk politics politely and sit down to dinner together. That doesn't happen that much anymore. So what I bring is, a strong work ethic, I bring a passion, I bring a love for our country, and I bring a love for individuals. And even though, and I have passed some bills, but I can't brag about the number of bills, but I can brag about the number of people who have called me individually and asked me to help them with their problems. And that is where I probably do my best work, is just talking to individuals, trying to meet their needs where I can, and then as we move forward and we have more opportunity for our bills to be heard, for my bills to be heard, I hope that I'll be able to pass some good legislation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Jeff, same question to you. Why should voters vote for you?
It's $1 million question, isn't it? So all the voters that are in the district, they are the boss, and they get to make the hiring decision. And do you, as a hiring agent, decide that you want to vote for somebody that has a track record of working together across the aisle to accomplish great things for our district, that will move our district and our state forward, that shows up every day for the job and votes accordingly, not to the party, but to the people in the district who you hear and who you listen to and who you bump into at the grocery stores and at the bank, talking to the teller, or whoever the folks are that you talk to on a daily basis. That's really your decision tonight. Because when I was at the state legislature, I was a known quantity. You knew the consistent nature of me showing up to things. You knew I listened. You knew I cared. I responded as much as I could, as quick as I could, to any constituents' concerns. I talked to somebody recently, and they reminded me that in 2020, they were dealing with a healthcare scare. Their insurance company wasn't actually going to pay for their insulin. And it was me that called the Department of Commerce. It was me that got the insulin covered by the insurance program. And it's me that allowed that woman to live in this district continually to this day. Why? She wasn't a member of my constituency, she wasn't a member of my district, she lived across the river. But because I saw that, I acted. Highway 14. In 2020, I went to 3 funerals because 3 individuals died on Highway 14 in a very short period of time on Martin Luther King weekend. And I re-energized everybody at the Capitol to say, look, we have to pass Highway 14 money. We need to make sure that those 4 lanes are funded so we can get people safely to and from work. We can safely get goods and services safely out of New Ulm to Twin Cities and on to Sorshops. And we did it. I have 13 accomplishments on my website. You can go to it, you can actually look not only at the accomplishment, but at the bill language, who supported me, and who supported it across the aisle in the Senate. I showed up every day at the legislature. Sometimes I was responding to emails at 2 in the morning. Why? Because I cared. Because the former state representative set the bar so high that I had to do just a little bit better. Because that's who I am as a competitive person. Hey, I grew up on a farm. I have a strong work ethic. I'll show up. I'll never avoid a vote like my opponent did, not once but twice in the last legislative biennium. I will show up to work. When my name is called, I will be a yes or no, because that green vote or that red vote is your voice at the legislature. And I am proud to serve you, just as I'm proud to have served you those past 2 years when I was there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Eklund and Mr. Rand, for the discussion this evening. We appreciate your willingness to engage with voters this evening and talk about why they should elect you to serve our region in the Minnesota House. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you to Laura Grossman of Alpha Media for your partnership this evening. Thank you to South Central College and Dr. Partner for being the host. Thank you to all of you for attending this evening. As a reminder, Greater Mankato Growth has 4 more candidate forums for federal, state, and local office. Each of these forums is reported by our friends at KTV and Bethany Lutheran College and will be available online along with candidate biographies at GreaterMankatoElections.com. Thank you, good night, and don't forget to vote.